The most watched news in Western Washington. This is King 5 News.
We will protect our residents. We will protect our neighborhoods, our businesses, and we will protect the safety of our first responders.
Freddie Gray means we got to fight back!
Freddie Gray means we got to fight back!
An uproar in Baltimore tonight. People angry after a judge declares a mistrial against a police officer charged in connection with the death of Freddie Gray. Gray died in police custody last April.
Officer William Porter is the first of 6 officers charged in the case, a case watched across the country. Jay Gray has our top story.
After deliberating for about 16 hours over 3 days this afternoon, jurors in the William Porter case told Judge Barry G. Williams for the second time that they were deadlocked, at which point he declared a hung jury in the high-profile case. Williams dismissed the 8 women and 4 men on the panel, telling them, quote, "Thank you for your diligence." Porter is the first of 6 Baltimore police officers to face trial after Freddie Gray was fatally injured in the back of a police transport van. Gray died in April from a severe spinal injury while in custody after being arrested when he ran from police. Prosecutors say officers failed to get medical help for Gray after the van stopped several times en route to the police station.
We ask the public to remain calm, patient, because we are confident there will be another trial with a different jury. We are calm. You should be calm too.
A handful of protesters gathered as news of the mistrial spread. A stepped-up police presence is also in place now, and an emergency operations center has been activated to coordinate any necessary response.
We are prepared to respond. We will protect our residents. We will protect our neighborhoods, our businesses, and we will protect the safety of our first responders.
It's now up to the state's attorney to decide if there will be a retrial in the case. Jay Gray, NBC News, Baltimore.
And good evening to all. I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, I begin with the breaking news. Hung jury in Baltimore. Angry protesters on the streets of Baltimore tonight. A judge declaring a mistrial in the first trial of a police officer charged in the death of Freddie Gray. A stunning and major development. This is Baltimore right now. Crowds are gathering. They have been growing in size by the moment since this mistrial was declared. Hundreds of people now marching through the streets, chanting the now familiar refrain, "No justice, no peace." The jury deliberating for 3 days in the case. 3 days, that's it. But they were unable to reach a verdict on any of the 4 counts in the trial of Officer William Porter. The 26-year-old was the first of 3 black officers to be tried, 6 officers in total charged. The Baltimore Sun reaching Porter at his home tonight, still facing trial. Porter would only say, quote, "It's not over yet, but thank you for the call." Miguel Marquez begins our coverage out front tonight. He is with the protesters on the streets of Baltimore. And Miguel, what is the reaction from the crowd tonight?
Well, look, they are not happy with the mistrial. I think it is that will be read in the neighborhoods in many areas that justice was not served. The protest here in front of City Hall, very small number of them left at this point, and it's pretty much breaking up for the most part. There are others that are going out, and this gentleman is talking about Kwame Rose, who was arrested earlier today. There were 2 people who were arrested. They moved through the streets. On the other side of the City Hall here is the court where Freddie Gray, where the hung jury was today in the Porter trial. They've marched around the city here and then over to police headquarters. But for the most part, very, very peaceful, boisterous, angry, but peaceful. There are other protesters, it sounds like now, gathering on the other side of the City Hall there. But at the moment, they're trying to stay to the sidewalks. The police not moving in with riot gear, but moving in very big numbers, blocking off major roadways so that protesters cannot shut them down. They did for a few minutes tonight, but that seems to be over. Erin?
And Miguel, what's the feeling as to why this happened on the street? I mean, it's a shock that this could have happened. What's the feeling as to the reason from people you're talking to?
Well, I think the sense is that it could have been a lot worse at this point. If this is the worst of it, I think Baltimore officials will breathe a sigh of relief. The fact that there was none of the charges that he was not found guilty on any of the charges today, I think comes as a shock to some of the individuals here. I think that many residents in Baltimore assumed that the lower charges, the misconduct in office, the reckless endangerment perhaps, that he would have been found guilty on those charges. To have a mistrial and this jury to be as divided as this city is on all of the charges, I think comes as a bit of a surprise, and they look forward, they say, to the prosecutors recharging him and trying it again. But clearly, with 5 other trials to go now, this really throws a wrench into the works.
A major wrench and a big shock. Thank you, Miguel. Freddie Gray's family tonight calling for peace, saying there will be another trial. Gene Casares is out front live in Baltimore. Gene, you've covered this trial since day one. You were there today. What do we know about why? I mean, there were 4 counts against this. This is a crucial case, the first case. They weren't able to reach agreement on any of them.
No, on none of them at all. You know, I was in the courtroom when the jury came in, when the judge determined that it was a hung jury, and I looked at that jury as they walked in. They looked tired, they looked beaten, they looked worn, they looked defiant, and they looked angry, and they looked as though they had fought so hard for their position, because there were 2 distinct sides in this case. And it was 2 weeks ago today that this jury was selected, a very diverse jury for Baltimore City. It was 7 blacks and 5 whites. And the prosecution theory really stemmed around the 6 different stops that police van carrying Freddie Gray made on April 12th. The prosecution theory was that between stops 2 and 4 is when Freddie Gray sustained a horrific neck injury. His neck was completely broken. The prosecution offered no theory at all as to how it happened. No evidence that it was a rough ride, no evidence that certain things happened. But they said it happened at that point because it was stop number 4 that William Porter asked him, "Do you need a medic?" And he said, "Yes." And that's what prosecutors pinned their case on. Now, the defense forensic pathologist Vincent DeMaio from San Antonio said no. That accident to the neck had to happen after stop 4, after Porter talked to him, because with a neck injury like that, you'd be totally paralyzed. You'd have no oxygen to your brain, and you could not respond talking to anybody. So 2 distinct sides. In the end, the jury could not decide on any of these charges. And we do understand that tomorrow sometime there'll be a conference with the judge and the attorneys to set a new date for a retrial, Aaron.
All right, thank you very much, Gene. And as Miguel is monitoring what's happening on the ground there, I want to go now to Paul Callan, former NYTD officer Bill Stanton, and our political commentator Van Jones. Bill, let me start with you. You heard Miguel, who's on the street, talking about just the incredible number of police officers that they are now flooding the streets of Baltimore tonight because they are worried that this could get out of hand. Are they really concerned?
Oh, absolutely. They're really concerned because they're afraid for this thing to build up. And as we've seen in the past, you know, cars turned over, cops assaulted, businesses set aflame. We don't need that to happen again in Baltimore.
I mean, Paul, this is pretty shocking. I mean, this is the first case. This was a case obviously of huge national significance. 6 officers charged, one of them charged with murder. First one out of the gate to fail this epically. I mean, and that's probably the right word here, right?
Yes.
Can't reach agreement on a single charge?
Well, I think what's shocking is that the prosecutors in Baltimore chose to go to trial on this case in the first place. It went in as a very, very weak case. Bear in mind, the central aspect of the case really is that this William Porter, 26-year-old African-American police officer, didn't put a seatbelt on Freddie Gray, and that Freddie Gray was injured. But at the point in time when he was putting the seatbelt on and was supposed to put it on and he didn't, he went up and told Goodson, the driver, that there were complaints and that they should take him for medical care. Based on that, he's charged with manslaughter and other very, very serious charges. Now, he said, Porter, when he testified, he's made 150 arrests using a van, and he's never put a seatbelt on. He didn't even know that seatbelts were required by the regulations in Baltimore. So I think the jury had a lot of problems with saying that's manslaughter. You know, a lot of people put their own kids in cars without seatbelts and don't get charged with a crime.
Van, you know, this obviously is a case. I mean, obviously there were the riots, violent riots earlier this year because of this, protests. The state attorney, Marilyn Mosby, in Baltimore, now a nationally known figure. She announced the charges one day after police turned over their investigation incredibly quickly. She was criticized at the time. People said she was moving too fast. Was this a result of that or not?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, the other way to look at it is that it is very, very difficult to get convictions for police officers, period. You've seen much, much worse instances of police brutality, and they don't even get charged. So it's a tough standard. And also, some of the jurors obviously did think that there was enough evidence there. So on the one hand, you don't have you got a mistrial, so they didn't get all the way across the finish line. But it's not like the cops were acquitted. An acquittal would have been a devastating body blow to that town and also to Marilyn Mosby. But you have a hung jury, and they have a chance to do it again. If I were in her situation, I would look at these charges and see, what did you do wrong here? But there's enough evidence that something happened badly for that jury to hang, and that lets you know something did go wrong there.
And we have no idea, Van, the split in any way, right? We know there are men and women on this jury, obviously 12 of them, 7 of them black, 5 of them white. We don't know where the split was in terms of where this broke down.
Let me say one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just say one more thing. Part of the reason that folks in Baltimore, I've talked to a lot of people today, if this is a normal situation, a bunch of guys grab somebody and the guy dies, all of the guys that grabbed the guy that died, they all go to jail. It's called felony murder. You're a part of this thing. You're breaking the law. So I think what happens is you're on the street level. You say, hold on a second. Nobody's going to go to jail when somebody dies like this, and it seems like a two-tiered justice system. I think the mayor has done a great job today to flood the zone with police, but to also affirm people's right to protest. This is not over yet. I don't think that you should say the prosecutor did the wrong thing yet. We're still in this process.
Paul, what about, though, I mean, as you see these protests growing tonight, I mean, you keep hearing no justice, no peace. Obviously, the implication when you hear that, given the protests, is the only thing that defines justice is some of these people going to jail. That may not be what the jury system says. The jury system may say no one should go to jail. What then happens here on the streets of Baltimore?
Well, we always like to think that the court system, sends a message about social policy in the United States, and that verdicts, are a demonstration of that policy. But the truth is, it's about evidence in court, and it's hard to prove a murder case beyond a reasonable doubt. What's, I think, particularly surprising here, strategically, you have a young, inexperienced prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, I think in her 30s, late 30s, when she takes on this enormous responsibility, and she tries the weakest possible case of all of her cases first.
Why would you do that?
Well, I don't know why you would do it, because it sets the wrong tone, it sends a bad message. Now, the argument that was made was that if he were convicted, they would have used the threat of jail to force him to testify against other police officers. But they could have accomplished that by giving him immunity, making a deal with him in advance of trial, and getting his testimony that way. So I think there was a strategic judgment error that was made in how she proceeded.
All right, well, I thank all of you very much, and of course, we should emphasize, as we're watching this story tonight, tomorrow they meet to set a new date for trial in the case of Mr. Porter, the first of the 6 officers charged going to court. Out front next, Donald.
A mistrial declared in Baltimore. A deadlocked jury failed to reach a verdict today in the trial of Officer William Porter. He's the first of 6 officers to be tried in the death of Freddie Gray. John Terrett is in Baltimore tonight. So after the mistrial, John, what happened?
John, good evening. 3:10 this afternoon came word that it was a mistrial, which means the mainly African-American, mainly female jury was able to come up with a decision on any of the 4 charges against Officer Porter, which were manslaughter, second-degree assault, misconduct in office, and reckless endangerment. What happened next is a small protest outside the courthouse turned ugly, with the traffic being blocked for a while as protesters, some of them wrestled with deputies as they tried to get into the court building. That protest died down pretty quickly, but continued around the courthouse and the City Hall area, where we are now until early this evening. The mayor of Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, says now is a time for the city and the community to come together and respect itself.
12 Baltimore City residents answered that very solemn call to serve, to hear this case, and to make a decision. They did that, and we have to respect that if we think that the process will be able to continue in Baltimore City. We have to respect the process. Justice is not a verdict. Justice is a process that we have to protect.
And more mollifying words this evening, John, from Billy Murphy, the lawyer representing the Gray family, who thanked the jury for their hard work and said that there are many bumps on the road to justice. John?
And so it appears there will be another trial, right, John?
Seems as if the state is determined to go after Officer William Porter, and tomorrow Judge Barry Williams brings all the attorneys together and they will discuss a new trial date. We assume sometime in the new year, because there's not much time between now and Christmas and the new year. It's interesting because the next trial in the sequence of 6 is due to start on January the 6th, so you've got to believe that the Officer Porter trial will come up at the end of the next 5, which means this city is going to go through this until the early summer. John?
All right, John Terrett, thank you very much.
First, though, breaking news out of Baltimore, where protesters took to the streets tonight, marching through the city, marching against what happened in a courthouse late today. 8 months after the death in police custody of Freddie Gray, a hung jury in the trial, the first of 6 police officers charged. Mr. Gray's death sparked the Baltimore's worst rioting since the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This time, local, state, and county authorities appear to be taking great care to avoid a repeat. Joining us now is CNN's Miguel Marquez. Take us through what happened today, Miguel.
Hey, if y'all don't know people here, introduce yourself.
Yeah, there was all 4 charges. There was a hung jury. They were not able to come to a decision, and there were protests in the streets of Baltimore. The protesters here, who have ended up at the Juvenile Justice System Center here, have sort of surrounded me because one of the individuals arrested today ended up here, and they are upset about that. This is a 16-year-old who ended up here. Another activist, a longtime activist here, well-known, Kwame Rose, was also arrested, and they're not quite sure about him. So now they're trying to look after their own. All of this coming out of that courtroom today and what happened there, a mistrial. I think people are not entirely surprised by a mistrial. This jury certainly as divided as the city of Baltimore itself, but I think that many of them were expecting at least some of the charges that Officer Porter would have been found guilty on, at least some of the charges, the lower charges like reckless endangerment and misconduct in office. I think it comes as a very big surprise to people here tonight. They marched around City Hall, down to police station, and then over to this area, demanding that they either produce or at least let them know how this 16-year-old is doing. Anderson?
Miguel, do we know much about why there was a mistrial?
I think, look, this was a very technical case. There were 16 witnesses that the prosecution brought, 12 that the defense brought. The prosecution arguing that the injury happened in the van, not that famous video that we saw, but it happened in the van. The only person that knows what happened in that van is Freddie Gray himself, and he is not here. They split clearly on Officer Porter's role in what he did or didn't do in getting him a seat belt or buckling him in and then getting him medical attention. These jurors clearly, like much of this city, unable to come to a resolution about what happened in that van. Officer Porter tonight says that, told the Baltimore Sun that the process will go on, and that he's ready for it, it seems, and that he now remains suspended without pay from the Baltimore Police Department.
All right,
Anderson?
Miguel Marquez, appreciate it tonight. We'll continue to check in with Miguel, and we'll have more on that story and updates throughout the next 2 hours. Back to our breaking news. A hung jury in a mistrial for the first police officer charged in the death of Freddie Gray, who suffered a broken neck in police custody. Baltimore on edge tonight. People took to the streets along with an especially heavy police presence. Gray's family is among those appealing for calm. So are Baltimore authorities, and so far calm has prevailed. I want to check with Brian Todd, who is in Baltimore for us tonight. What are you seeing where you are, Brian?
Well, Anderson, this has been a pivotal moment for the city, and so far things have been pretty peaceful. This is kind of an example of what you're seeing in the city of Baltimore tonight. Behind me, 3 unmarked police vans full of officers, police trying to maintain a visible presence here, but not an overbearing, not an overwhelming presence. They are in several streets here, patrolling around kind of subtly, just walking the streets and hanging around, waiting for any possible protests to happen. We're walking a route now along Gay Street, where there was a protest march earlier tonight. It came up this way, and then it came across Gay Street over here to the Baltimore Juvenile Justice Center, where protesters were basically protesting against the arrest and detention of a 16-year-old young man who was taken into custody after scuffling with sheriff's deputies. There was one other arrest of a protester for doing the same thing down around the City Hall and the courthouse area. And that's really the extent of the clashes tonight, Anderson. Protesters have just broken up here a short time ago. This was a critical moment. Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, Police Commissioner Kevin Davis had all appealed for calm. Community leaders said they were going to be out tonight in some of the critical areas where we saw such violence back in April to appeal for people to stay calm, and if you wanted to protest, certainly you can be loud and be passionate, but don't break the law and don't engage with police. And that is pretty much how it played out tonight, Anderson. Again, a very critical moment. People here not necessarily pleased with a mistrial, but kind of waiting to see what the next step is.
Well, just legally, what is the next step from the DA? I mean, how closely are the protesters, and I assume the protesters are watching that very closely.
They are watching it very closely. The lead prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, may make a decision as early as tomorrow on whether to retry Officer William Porter. That's going to be kind of a critical phase here because you've got 5 other trials, of course, of Baltimore City police officers aside from Porter's case. Porter's case was going to be critical. You've got another case, I believe, coming up in January where Officer Cesar Goodson, his trial may start in January. All these trials are going to be playing out between now and March. So protesters and protest leaders are watching the next step very carefully. We don't hear of any planned protests for tomorrow, but these things are very dynamic. They're very spontaneous. Maybe depending on what the prosecutor says tomorrow about a possible retrial of Officer Porter, you may see another protester's presence.
All right, Brian Todd, appreciate it. Joining us now, 2 former federal prosecutors, CNN legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin and Sonny Hostin, and CNN law enforcement analyst and former NYPD detective Harry Hauk. Were you surprised by this, Sonny?
I wasn't surprised by this, actually, and
You said she had rushed the charges earlier.
I've been critical of the decision that the state's attorney made, only because we know that Freddie Gray was arrested on April 12th. He died on April 19th in the hospital. She announced her charges on May 1st, Anderson. I have never in my career seen murder charges brought against 6 different defendants in under 2 weeks. You just simply cannot investigate and put a theory together for a trial that quickly. And so I'm not surprised that this jury struggled with this case. And I think that we need to call it what it is. This really is a loss for the prosecution. Prosecutors win about 95% of their cases. There's a 95% conviction rate. Only 5% of cases end up in a hung jury. And so this is a really big problem for the prosecution, especially because they say they needed Porter's testimony for the next 2 trials. One is January 4th, which is the van driver, Officer Goodson. The next one is January 25th, which is Sergeant White's. So if you don't have that information, if you don't have that testimony, what do you do? And the public's confidence, I think, in the system has been shaken because of really prosecutorial immaturity.
Well, Jeffrey, I mean, you've been saying all along the case against Porter wasn't very strong.
Yes, and, think about it. There was no witness to Porter's behavior except Porter himself. And Porter testified, and from all that I can tell, he was a credible witness. And he, by the prosecution's own acknowledgement, did call for help, for medical help at some point. Now, the theory of the prosecution case was that he should have strapped him in, he should have strapped Freddie Gray into the van, and that he called too late. Those are tough, that's a tough basis on which to convict a police officer with basically a good record, and the jury didn't do it. Now, I think one of the key issues that we don't know the answer to is how the jury split. Was it 11-1 for conviction? Was it 11-1 for an acquittal? That could have a big impact on whether the prosecutor retries this case. But in any case, this is a very bad result for the prosecution, and I think all these cases are in jeopardy now.
And Harry, I mean, obviously this has an impact on all the other cases as well.
Sure, exactly. I mean, this is definitely a loss for the prosecution in this case. I never thought there was any evidence at all against police officer Porter. All the evidence that I saw that was put forth in this case here regarding it was, statements that he had allegedly made. The statements he made were fine. I mean, he informed his sergeant that Gray wanted to go to the hospital. There's no evidence to indicate whether or not if he went to the hospital at that time or at the hospital when he finally did go to time had anything to do with his death at all. Would he have lived? There's no medical examiner out there that's saying that he would have lived if he went to the hospital any earlier.
Right.
So, and as a police officer, you're not a doctor. You've got a little leeway there to be able to make a decision on whether or not somebody wants to go to the hospital or not.
Was it a mistake, Sonny, to try Porter first?
I think so.
Or did they think this was the easiest one?
My understanding is that they tried Porter first because they needed him to get to Goodson, and who is, I think, in their view, the most culpable, the van driver, and they needed Porter's testimony to try to convict Sergeant White. And so they had to do it this way once all of the trials were sort of separated. But the bottom line is, if the prosecution thought that he was the low-hanging fruit, if the prosecution thought that that was the easiest or least culpable defendant, then you give that guy immunity. You don't try that guy. If he won't take a plea, you give the guy immunity and you try to get a conviction against the one that you think was the bad doer, the one that you think was the worst.
And I don't think the people of Baltimore would rebel if 5 officers were prosecuted versus 6. I mean, it just doesn't have a political or even a great moral significance, the difference between 5 and 6. And the reason why prosecutors usually start with their best case is that it starts a cascade. If you convict one person, you can then usually get plea bargains with the rest of them. So the idea of starting with your weakest case, which now has led to this bad result for the prosecution, leaves them in a worse situation than if they'd never charged him at all.
So what happens now? I mean,
I think they got to try the other cases with the evidence they have. You know, Sonny was talking to some of the lawyers involved here and learned that the lawyers for Porter are not ready. You know, the prosecution, when they want a retrial, they usually said, well, let's start on Monday. Well, the prosecution, the defense lawyers have other commitments. They're going to push this thing months down the road, which, you know, I think is just, again, bad news for the prosecution.
I see them retrying the case.
Retrying the Porter case?
Yeah, they have to. For me, this is a political prosecution. I don't think there's any evidence here at all, Porter, or at least the 3 officers that took him down, that are responsible for the death of Freddie Gray here. So I think that they have to try him again just for political reasons.
I think the politics are, I think Harry's exactly right.
And I think what's so interesting about it is how can they make the decision so quickly to retry Porter? This is a case where you got to go back to the office, you got to get the transcripts, you got to try to interview jurors, you've got to have an executive meeting and figure out, can we win this case? If they announce tomorrow, quite frankly, that they're charging Officer Porter, it's another example of prosecutorial
Sonny,
indiscretion, I think.
Jeff Toobin as well, Harry Houck as well. Thank you. Just ahead, I'm going to talk to the Gray family attorney, Billy Murphy, about how the family is doing tonight and what comes next, what they think about this development. We'll be right back.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism